You're welcome to today's video. In today's video, we're going to be looking at two crucial aspects of applied linguistics: interlanguage and fossilization. Now, I need you to take out your pens as usual, take out your paper, and I will see you at the end of this video. The concept of interlanguage. What is interlanguage? Interlanguage was coined by the American linguist Larry Selinker in 1972. Presently, he's a professor emeritus of linguistics at the University of Michigan. Now, this concept is a term used by L2 learners in an attempt to create a language system that helps in communicating and aimed at using the target language in communication. Most often, this creation is affected by the learner's native language, as they make use of knowledge of their native language to understand and to, organize the second language. This is done in the process of competing for existing competence gap. Now, Selinker, he assisted or he helped to found this field of L2 acquisition, and his suggestions were quite robust regarding the concept of interlanguage and fossilization. Now, interlanguage is often defined as a unique, by the term unique, we mean distinctive, a distinctive linguistic system that second language learners of English construct. They build, they form, and they construct another language in an attempt to learn a second language. Now, Selinker recognized the fact that L2 learners create a linguistic system that draws in part of a learner's L1 and part of the target language. This is what makes interlanguage a distinctive linguistic system. Interlanguage can also be explained as an idiolect. Okay, now this term is gotten from the word dialect. Okay, idio means to own, something that is personal, something that is peculiar. Okay, looking at how it is etymologically related to the Greek prefix idio. Okay, so idiolect is an individual, unique use of language, often influenced by different aspects of a person's life, whether social background, education, friend group, and hobbies. Okay, so it can also be explained as an idiolect developed by an L2 learner. It occurs as learners gradually approach attaining competence in the target language. Okay, so it's evolving. That's why we say that interlanguage is a continuum, is a range, it's evolving, it sprouts, continuous sprouting, budding, and growing towards the target language. Because interlanguage is a structure that is evolving, it is often explained as a form of language that is a skill between L1 and L2, which all learners navigate. So if you're learning a second language, definitely you're going to pass through this journey, okay, which all learners navigate. And we say that it is a continuum. Interlanguage is used by learners during the process of learning a second language. The language and linguistic system of the learner has traces of his L1 and native language and traces of the second language, which is to be acquired. Now, the resultant effect is the formation of a language that has its own patterns and rules. Okay, patterns different from the L1, patterns different from the L2, having its own unique patterns. Okay, having a partial understanding of the target language and several features of some overgeneralized rule. Okay, so interlanguage is entirely different from both the learner's L1 and the target language. Although it has its own rules and system, it is often seen as having some ungrammatical sentences and elements. Okay, so given that IL, that's abbreviating interlanguage for short, given that interlanguage consists of elements of L1 and L2, as well as the speaker's perceptions, it is always unique from speaker to speaker. Now we see this graph here. We call it a graph now, or an image or a diagram. Okay, so we can see that interlanguage is like a bridge, okay, like a crossover, like a connection, like a link between an individual's mother tongue, that's the meaning of MT, um, native language, or L1. Okay, so we have MT and L1. So it's a bridge, it's a connection. We often say that is a connection between an individual's native language and the target language, which is TL, as we can see in that figure. Now, moving over to these two figures, why we are saying that an individual's interlanguage is unique can be explained by looking at these two figures. Now, look at the first learner. We have the first learner and we have this figure, MTNLL1, and we can see the gap between the interlanguage and the L2. Now, this first learner is closer to achieving competence in the target language compared to the second learner, which is still far away from attaining proficiency in the target language. So it is based on these two figures that we say that an individual's interlanguage is unique to that particular person, okay, is unique to that individual. Now let's look at a few premises upon which interlanguage is based. Okay, there are some principles upon which interlanguage is based, some foundational ideas that accounts for interlanguage. Now, the first idea there is that the system is a learner's grammar constructed. Okay, interlanguage is a system, is a learner's grammar constructed, and is called a mental grammar. What do we mean by mental grammar? It means it is an internalized system of rules and structures that speakers process or they possess, allowing them to produce and to comprehend language effectively for communication, of course. Okay, so when we talk about mental grammar, we mean deliberately developing that grammar as opposed to universal grammar, which is an innate ability. So while we have mental grammar, we also have universal grammar. So while universal grammar is innate, is an innate ability, mental grammar is more deliberate. Okay, so that's what we mean by mental grammar, an internalized system of rules and structure. It's often contrasted with linguistic performance, which is the actual use of language. Number two, this grammar is permeable, that is open to influence from outside input and also influenced internally, what we refer to as internal processing. So when we say it's permeable, we mean it is absorptive, it is porous, it is penetrable. Okay, it can accept both internally and from outside. We have internal input and we have external input. Number three is the fact that interlanguage is the grammar is often seen as transitional or dynamic, resulting in an interlanguage continuum. Okay? It is dynamic. It keeps evolving until it gets to a particular stage of competence or until it fossilizes. Okay? Then number 4 is the fact that interlanguage systems are variable. That is, learners are likely to have competing rules at different stages of development. Okay, so if learner 1 has his interlanguage, it presupposes that learner two's interlanguage is different from learner 1, learner two's interlanguage is different from learner 3, and all of that. Okay, so it is variable, it is irregular, and it is differing. Okay, however, they have been this particular premise has been disputed. Okay, several researchers argue that the interlanguage systems are homogeneous, that is, they are the same. Learner 1, Learner 2, Learner 3 interlanguages are the same. Some researchers have argued this fact that they are homogeneous and they are alike, and that variability simply reflects mistakes learners make and as an aspect of performance and not competence. Others, however, argue that a learner's performance is variable, it's also variable. Okay, they may apply the same rule in different contexts, and that accuracy and fluency vary across occasions as a learner focuses on producing grammatically correct sentences. So this dispute has been ongoing as to whether interlanguage is variable or is not variable. Okay? So it's left for us to make our own deductions. Number 5 is the fact that it is systematic. By systematic, we mean that it has its own internal rules that are often, on most occasions, incorrect. Okay, so despite its variability, it is possible to detect the rule based nature of the learner's use of the second language. Okay, so that's why we say that it is systematic. Number 6 is that interlanguage is likely to fossilize. What do we mean by that? That is, developing the interlanguage learning, it stops at a certain stage. Learning stops, development stops, the continuum suddenly comes to an end. Okay, so fossilization will be discussed discussed soon as we progress in this video. And also, we must understand that when we talk about interlanguage being fossilized at some stage, we must also pay attention to the fact that we have the prevalence of backsliding, okay, which is a reproduction of errors, which is often common with fossilized learners. Okay, now backsliding is unique to only L2 grammars as it doesn't occur in L1 acquisition. Backsliding means going back to errors that have already been corrected, okay, and it is unique to L2 grammars rather than L1 acquisition. So let us take note of that. Now we quickly want to look at 5 ways that learners create interlanguage. Okay, we call it internal processing. How do they create their interlanguage? Number 1, there is overgeneralization. Now, this involves extending the application of a rule in L2. Okay, now because you are already familiar with some rules in the target language, you now extend that rule to all other aspects. Okay, so it involves extending the application of a rule in L2, not knowing that using the same rule in new situation may likely lead to errors. Okay, that is, learners group similar items and try to predict their behavior based on a rule that they are already familiar with. For example, pluralizing the word deer, okay, the animal, the deer, is often, the plural form is often not pluralized. Okay, there's no addition of s. Now, when the learner is already familiar with the fact that adding an s indicates pluralization, it goes ahead to apply that rule. Okay, even on the verb go. Okay, now because he's familiar with the rule of adding ed to past tense, he forgets or he's not aware of the fact that we have irregular verbs and he says gold instead of went. So that's basically what overgeneralization is all about when it comes to a learner creating his own interlanguage. Number two is learning strategies. Learning strategies. Now, this involves learners adopting different learning approaches. For instance, the act of simplification. Some some incorrect learning strategies may result in stagnation in the development of some aspect of L2. Okay, so we have the aspect of simplification, which could affect syntactic or lexical rules, adding, deleting, restructuring the system. Okay, so learning strategies could also is also a learner's um, strategy or attempt in creating his own interlanguage. Number three, we have language transfer. Now, this involves learning and using the knowledge from L1 to understand and produce meaning in L2. Now, if L1 and L2 are very different, errors are definitely bound to occur in L2 production. So, making such transfer from L1 to L2 can be hazardous to the learner's internal processing of interlanguage. Number four is transfer of training, which we call T of T. This has to do with how instruction plays a significant role in language acquisition. Okay, so the way learners are taught produces both progression or retrogression. It produces either correct sentences or correct forms or erroneous forms. So lack of formal instruction or wrong instruction may result in replicating incorrect language forms. Number five is communication strategies. This refers to the strategies learners use to overcome problems in order to convey their intended meanings. Now, when a learner is faced with some challenges in communicating, he resorts to certain strategies. I'll give a few examples. Paraphrasing. Okay, when a sentence is too difficult, the result to paraphrasing, the result to substituting, making substitutions, especially when it comes to pronunciation skills, substituting the otherwise difficult vowels, central vowels, okay, substituting them with much easier vowels. We also have another strategy, which is coining new words to avoid or to avert certain challenges. We also have the issue of code switching, code mixing, okay, from L2 to L1. Asking for clarification from interlocutors for the correct word is another strategy for communication. Also, we have non-verbal strategies, that is the use of gestures in trying to communicate with an interlocutor. And finally, we have another strategy of avoiding topics for which they lack the necessary vocabulary. Okay, so these are communication strategies that learners employ in trying to communicate. Now, so these are how learners create their own interlanguage. Now, moving on, the concept of interlanguage is a metaphor of how L2 acquisition takes place and also offers a general account of how it occurs. Okay, so how L2 acquisition takes place and how it occurs is what interlanguage is, looking at it as a metaphor. Okay, now this leads us to what is referred to as the computational model of L2 acquisition. Now, if you look at the figure below, we have an input, and what we have at the extreme end is the output. But within Okay, within is the intake, what the individual takes and accepts. Okay, and his knowledge of L2 will now produce his output, which is his interlanguage. Now, moving forward, I want to quickly say that interlanguage is closely related to pidgins and creoles. However, each has their own grammar and phonology. Pidgins and creoles, they have their grammar and phonology. Interlanguage have the grammar and phonology. Okay, but before we proceed with this, I would want us to go back to slide 13 when we talked about the concept of interlanguage as a metaphor. Okay, concept of interlanguage as a metaphor. Now, what we are saying here, before we proceed to creoles and pidgins, is that it incorporates elements from mentalist theories of linguistics. For example, we have the LAD. Okay, so trying to justify what is referred to as computational model of L2 acquisition is the fact that it incorporates elements from mentalist theories of linguistics, for example, the language acquisition device, which you are familiar with, and elements from cognitive psychology. Okay, that is a learner's strategy. So, as a metaphor of L2 acquisition, interlanguage implies that the human mind functions like a computer. Okay, it functions like a computer, and the learner is exposed to input, which is processed in two stages. Okay, now the first stage is that parts of the input are attended to and taken into short term memory. These parts are called intakes. Okay, now I hope we are looking at slide 13 where we have that figure. Okay, so the first part is called intakes. Now, the second part is when some of the intake is preserved in long term memory as L2 knowledge. Okay, so we have intakes plus L2 knowledge, which results in an output. Now, this process is responsible for this creation. Okay, okay, the process responsible for this creation occurs within what we call the black box of the learner's mind. That is where the learner's interlanguage is constructed. So the intake plus the L2 knowledge occurs within the black box of the learner's mind, okay, where the learner's interlanguage is constructed. Now, eventually, the L2 knowledge is used by the learner to produce spoken and written output, which is, of course, the learner language or the interlanguage. Okay, so that explains that figure we have on slide 13. Figure we have on slide 13. Okay, so moving over to the 14th slide is interlanguage fossilization. Interlanguage fossilization. Interlanguage fossilization is when a second language learner fails to attain competence in the target language. Okay, so the learner does not reach the end of the interlanguage continuum. He stops at some certain stage. It occurs in most language learners and cannot be remedied by further construction or instruction, rather. Okay, it stops, it freezes. Okay, it is a learner's failure to improve. Either you are already satisfied with how far you have gone, or you can't go any further as a result of certain challenges. Okay, so it's a learner's failure to improve. Now, why does this occur? When people learning a second language keep taking rules from their native language and incorrectly applying them to the second language, it will definitely affect your interlanguage. Okay, so when this keeps happening, it will result in a language system that is different from L1 and L2. That is why it occurs when a learner keeps taking rules from their native language and applying them incorrectly to the second language. That is what will result is um, interlanguage fossilization. Okay, now moving forward, fossilized structures may not be persistent. They may not be persistent. However, learners may learners may succeed in producing the correct target language form. However, when learning or reading is incorrect, okay, is incorrectly done continuously without corrections, with lack of corrections, fossilization is bound to occur. Now, an interlanguage can fossilize or will cease developing in any of its developmental stages. Okay, so fossilization is a process of freezing of the transition between L1 and L2. Freezing, that's why we use that word freezing. Okay, so in trying to attain, in trying to accomplish or achieve or reach your goal, your target language, if corrections are not made, fossilization will occur. Okay, fossilization is bound to occur. Now, fossilization is often seen as a result of complacency or inability to overcome obstacles. Okay, so once you are not content, or once once you are satisfied, you have the self satisfaction, okay, you are just okay at the level you have achieved. It brings about fossilization. So it's an inability to overcome the obstacles. Also, when you cannot overcome the obstacles in acquiring the L2, you just stop learning, you stop progressing. Okay, you can't acquire native proficiency in L2. Progress will just stop. It can also occur when a learner succeeds in conveying messages with their current L2 knowledge. Okay, so you are just okay. Once you can convey messages, you stop learning. Now, the need to correct the structure form is therefore not present. Okay, so the learner fossilizes the form instead of correcting whatever errors are still present. Now, there are some facts about fossilization, namely the fact that it can be unconscious, okay, it is not seen as a problem, it is changeable, difficult to eradicate, deeply connected to the idea of purpose, and unpredictable. Now, these are some facts about fossilization that will quickly run through. Now, when we say that fossilization can be unconscious, what we mean is that it can also be conscious, okay? Now, fossilization occurs, or we say that it is conscious when you have made up your mind, you have decided that that's where you want to stop. So you consciously stop learning. However, it can be unconscious. Learners are not aware that they are making errors and that they have stopped learning. Okay, that's when we say that fossilization is unconscious. Now, fossilization, another fact about fossilization is that it's not often seen as a problem. Okay, though an obstacle or hindrance to achieving native like competence is not often seen as a problem because you have at least achieved knowledge of the L2 to an extent. So people don't normally see it as a problem. Now, fossilization is changeable. It's difficult to reverse, but with focused effort and correct strategies, it can be overcome. Okay, then we also have that it is difficult to eradicate, really resistant to correction. Socialization is resistant to correction and may linger for a long time because it is ingrained, okay, despite exposure to instruction what a learner has achieved at a certain stage is already ingrained, and he'll keep repeating those corrections and mistakes without progressing. Okay, so it's quite difficult to eradicate, but it's not impossible. Also, fossilization is unpredictable. What do we mean by that? The particular stage fossilization happens is highly unpredictable, and the patterns of errors are also unlikely to predict. Also, we have the fact that it is deeply connected to the idea of purpose. What do we mean by this? When there is a lack of motivation or the absence of a specific goal or attainment, L2 will fossilize. Okay, if your goal is to be able to just greet people or to show fatigue communion and you have achieved that, it will fossilize. Okay, so when there is no motivation, interlanguage can fossilize. Okay, so these are some facts about fossilization that we need to really understand concerning this concept. So we have been able to look at we're going to look at interlanguage and fossilization. Now, pay close attention to some issues that have been raised, some disputes that have been raised, and you go further and do more analysis or research on what fossilization and interlanguage is all about. Thank you for watching. Now, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye.